what I wanted to do this afternoon is talk a little bit about some of aspects of exhibiting. Sandeep, who's a great exhibitor, invited me to speak, and I'm delighted to talk a little bit. And the thing that interests me the most is showing the things that are hard to see. And about me, I'm an exhibitor. I've been a judge. I used to write magazine columns on exhibiting. I published a book called Path to Gold, 175 Proven Stamp Exhibiting Tips. And I'm currently a book publisher of primarily stamp exhibits. And I've done about, 55 so far, which I'll mention at the very end. And this presentation today reflects mostly US exhibiting practices. I know that various countries have different practices. To the extent that any of these things make any sense or are relevant, you may want to consider them for those of you who exhibit. And to the extent that these don't make any sense or don't apply, of course, just ignore them. So the question is, how can viewers see things that aren't easy to see? And how can exhibitors show things that aren't easy to show? And I think that there are three basic categories of things that can be challenging to show: the physical properties of the items we show, the context they fit in, and how we focus attention. So physical properties include paper, perforation, watermark, knives, and tagging.
Physical properties.
Now, I'm perfectly willing to have anyone interrupt at any time if they have questions or comments, because I would like to have some discussion. Here's why. If I talk and there's no sound coming back, I can't tell if you've all fallen asleep or gone out to have lunch or something. So if someone says something once in a while, I'll know that you're still there. One of the things that comes up is paper thickness. Now, it's really, really hard to show paper thickness, but a guy here named Ed Andrews figured out that if he puts a black paper triangle, or a mount, which is inert, chemically inert, different thicknesses of paper will allow different degrees of the black underneath to show. So this is a page from one of his exhibits, or a portion of a page, that shows, for the same stamp, 4 different paper thicknesses. I thought that was a brilliant way to show this characteristic. In the United States, we've had some stamps printed, called wet printings or dry printings, where the paper is slightly different. It's one of them is 35 millimeters, and one is 36 millimeters. And how do you show the difference between stamps that are 1 millimeter separate, 1 millimeter different in size? Well, what this fellow did, he showed 3 of them in a strip, and that made the difference 3 millimeters. So you can see that there's a constant left edge. Oops, sorry, let me go back. And you can see that there's a difference here. And he attached a ruler top and bottom so that magnified by 3, you can see the difference. Whereas if you just had a single one, it would be much harder to show it. perfins. Perfins come different orientations, upside. This is a page that tried to show this well. We're going to come to a page in a few minutes that'll show things better. But this is better than just showing the stamps from the front. Of course, this requires having 2 copies of each. But the perfins as black holes, which is a white stamp on a black mount, are much easier to see than the front of the stamp on a black mount. Another thing that sometimes matters is the perforations. In this country, we had trade stamps. When you purchased items from gas stations, you got stamps, you put them in books, and you could trade them in for material. Now, these stamps had different perforation patterns. Who knew this until this guy discovered this? They had different perforation patterns. So he made up types, and he described them, and he showed them. And it's virtually impossible to see the perforations in the stamps. But he made wonderful little diagrams that showed the perf patterns. And I thought that was brilliant. I don't think anyone else ever collected these things, but the guy had a tremendous way of presenting it. On things that are more commonly encountered, we have, line perforation and cone perforation. Sometimes we have examples of the same stamp both ways, or we wish to describe which perforation type a particular stamp has. It's not always clear to a viewer what line perforation or what cone perforation means. So it might be worthwhile to give an example of what it means, and you can even make it more clear so that a viewer can appreciate what you're showing. Now, there are some very, very complicated perforation things. This is an example from Dan Walker, who is, I think it's Dan Walker, showing a very complicated perforation thing on Jaipur. Sandeep, is this yours or Dan's?
This is Dan's.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So what Dan has done, because some people absorb graphic data, he's shown a picture, and some people absorb word data. So he's described it in words. So it's complicated, but you can see what it is. It's as clear as can be made, I think. I think this is a wonderful example of showing something that if you only showed the item on the page, people would have no idea what it was and they wouldn't even look at it. But the 2-color diagram with arrows and words, I think is a marvelous example of how to show complicated things in the perforation area. Another one of the things that we exhibit is the watermarks of our stamps. If we're lucky, the watermark shows right through the back, and you can just put the stamp up, backside up, and the watermark will show. Sometimes the watermark doesn't show, and in those cases, it's very easy to use a scan of an illustration. Now, I mentioned earlier that there's ways of showing perfins that are better than what that man had. This is a page from a Chinese exhibit, an exhibit of China. And these stamps have watermarks in different orientations. A viewer would have absolutely no way in the world of knowing that But with software, graphic software, you can take an image and reverse it, or invert it, or invert it and reverse it to show exactly what the watermark is that can't be seen by the viewer. And this makes it, more engaging and more interesting. Now, the things I've shown so far have been stamps. There are things in postal stationery that can be hard to show. Envelopes are made with knives, the cutting pattern that shows how the envelope was laid out and assembled. Sometimes we unfold or disassemble the stationery to show the shape. In Deschel's book, he's got diagrams for stationery. I found them very, very useful. And for the stationery that I have, I include his illustration. I probably should have included a credit, but I see that I neglected to do so. And then sometimes, as in the case with the registered envelopes that I'm familiar with, it's very, very hard to see whether it's a straight line or a slightly unstraight line that makes the edges, but the diagrams allow you to see the differences. And my theory is, in order to forestall a question from a judge, if you do it for one, you should do it for all. Even though there's only one version of this envelope, if you show one, I believe you should show all. Otherwise, the judges will say, hey, how come you didn't include this? And then, again, there was another envelope. This was just the page it happened to be on. If you're going to show a used example, show a good used example. That's all that was. I don't know much about modern Indian postage stamps. I know that in the US, stamps are tagged in a variety of ways so that the canceling machines will know where to apply the cancel on the stamp. When this exhibit page was first shown, everyone stood around, looked, the tagging pattern, and we were all mesmerized because we had never seen that before. And what this fellow did, a very smart man, was he took a piece of clear, what's the word for the material that exhibit page holders are made of? The inert clear plastic. It's the stuff that it's clear stuff that you can put in a copy machine. They used to be used for transparencies when you did slideshows with a slide projector, the overhead projector. But he printed the green bars, and then he inserted it inside the mount to get the bars exactly where he wanted them. Was that clear, what I just said?
Yes.
Good. And I think this looks absolutely marvelous. That was what I wanted to talk about for the physical characteristics of stamps. There are, of course, other elements that are hard to show. One being the context. How do you show how they fit in? So, this is a page of color trials. You can look at color trials. If we know these stamps, we can appreciate these color trials as being, very, very interesting and attractive. But if a viewer or a judge is unfamiliar with this material, a way to make it more interesting, and one is missing here, but to show the issued colors so that there's a basis for knowing what the difference is. The thing that's key, I think, is if you can present something that fits within the knowledge base of a viewer, and then show how what you're wanting to focus attention upon is different than what is in the knowledge base, it makes it much easier for a judge or a viewer to understand and to appreciate what you're showing. And this is just a close-up of that. The color trial here and the issued color here. And that this, this could be stronger if, this is my page. It would have been better if I had fewer words at the top and I pointed out that these are the only copies of these color trials known. But that's a different focus in exhibiting. But there's material that's come from the archives, the LaRue archives, these little proof impressions with lighting information. And in isolation, again, we may not understand, or the viewer or the judges may not understand what they are and how they're used. Well, there's an illustration here taken from the book Fundamentals of Philately that presents it in context, so someone can see how it's used and what it and why it's significant. Well, I didn't do a good job describing that, but why it's significant in the printing process. And this demonstrates knowledge, which can be used to justify a higher metal level, because knowledge is one of the criteria that's used in judging an exhibit. Now, this process is all trial and error. It is interesting for us to fully understand how things work. These stamps made with a steel block to a master die to a transfer roll. For some stamps, this is an example that was used for Canada, and I recreated this for India. This page did not work. Well, I don't think it worked. Does anyone have any comment as to why they think it may not have worked well? The reason I thought it didn't work well was because the pictures were too big and too dark and they detracted from the material. The eye is drawn away from that which we want to focus upon. So I didn't think this page was done well. So I didn't use pages like this. In one case, where there was a plate proof, maybe it's too big, showing exactly how it was done, I thought was very useful. Again, it provides information as to what this is. It shows the context for how it was prepared. Now, what if I told you that the presentation of stamps were improved by showing them in a non-linear presentation and with writing, with you writing on the stamps themselves to show what they meant? You'd think that was absurd. Well, during the occupation of Czechoslovakia by the Germans in the Second World War, Czechoslovakians did all kinds of stuff to what's a good, passive resistance. So the Czech engravers engraved a series of stamps. Now, we can look at these series of stamps and we can read the words in the bottom here that says, when placed in their proper positions, the tree lines, the cloud outlines, and the other design lines form a map of the Republic. Well, I can't see that. You can't see that. Hardly anyone can see that. But if you want to show it, you arrange the stamps in a non-linear fashion and you draw on the stamps. Fortunately, these stamps are not very expensive. And this shows you Czechoslovakia. But I know that in the United States, most people have no awareness at all of what Czechoslovakia is or where it is or what the shape of Czechoslovakia is or was. So you can put a map next to the stamps to show exactly what it is so that the viewer has a reference point to understand things. This is one of my favorite examples of tremendous skill in exhibiting because it's so atypical and so unusual, but the exhibitor did a tremendous job. Another challenge we have is highlighting individual stamps on the sheet. So we can look at this page of war tax stamps. We see a portion of a sheet here. And there's 5 of them that are worthy of attention. But it's kind of hard to know, where you're looking for. The same person who prepared the overlay to show the tagging prepared an overlay to show the stamps he wanted to highlight. What he did was he put an rectangular gray image in the spots of the stamps that he did not want to draw attention. So this was a bunch of grays, these were grays, and the ones he wanted the viewer to focus on have a transparent overlay. So this immediately directs the attention to what you want the viewer to focus on, and with the enlargements and the arrows and the text, you convey everything that you might want to show. Any comments or questions?
I don't think so.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay. By asking the question, it gave me a chance to drink something. Presenting panes from booklets can be challenging. It's easy to show the panes. These panes, and all of Indian panes up to independence, were a result of a particular printing process. These panes, there's white margin above, white margin below. There's printed margin above, and not shown on this page is printed margin below. And as a way of making it easier for the viewer to understand how these were prepared, why there were differences, and concomitant with that is showing the judges that you have knowledge. You can provide contextual information, you can provide printing information to show how these were prepared. Now, I'm going to betray a little bit of my ignorance here. It wasn't until I saw I apologize, I don't remember the man's name, the incredibly well done booklet on Indian booklets. No, the book, big book, wonderful big book on Indian booklets. It wasn't until I saw it laid out in that book that I realized that green stamps, the half-anna stamps, came in a green booklet, and red stamps, the one-anna stamps, came in a red booklet. I mean, pretty obvious once someone points it out to you. And had I known that, I would have said it and pointed it out a little more clearly, that there was a color connection to make it easier for people to know what they had in their pockets. Am I the only person who didn't know that?
Are you the only person? What? I'm sorry, we didn't hear you.
Am I the only person who didn't know that the green stamps were on green booklets and red stamps were on red booklets?
I didn't know that either, so. Did you know that?
Oh, good.
Everybody else seems to know that. I guess, Steve, you and I are the only ones.
Okay. Oh, and this is just saying the same thing. Now, this is a bad picture. I had a very hard time. I had a hard time. So this is not perfect, but it's a start doing it right. Now, one of the areas, it's fun, is overprints. Stamp on the bottom here as a misplaced overprint. This is a terrible way to show it. There would have been much better ways to show it, but I didn't know enough at the time. You can show the overprint right next to it, and then you do a normal one for comparison, so you can see the differences. To expect someone to look close enough to see the differences is a little unrealistic. So this is an example of a poorly done example. Now, in the Chamba stationery, in which I have an interest, some of the eyes point left and some of the eyes point right. Again, no one's going to know what I mean when you say that, and no one's going to look closely enough to see it. But if you enlarge it and label it, a viewer can see that, I gotta find it, that the face looks left or the face looks right. Otherwise, no one knows what you're talking about, no one can see it, and no one can appreciate it. One of our colleagues does Travancore very well. Now, this is an example of how the overprints got onto the stamps. I mean, we don't necessarily think about it, but it's done in reverse. So it's prepared in reverse, a plate is made up in reverse, and then it's applied to the stamps. So this is very neat because it shows us how it's done. But it's particularly neat. It's essential if you want to discuss the different varieties where the arrangement of the O and the S, how they're arranged and how you get different varieties. Without this image, you wouldn't be able to understand what you're seeing here. Again, it's you have to assume, well, this is not a nice thing to say. You're going to have to assume, I was going to say you have to assume people are stupid. That's a very terrible thing to say, so pretend I didn't say that. You have to imagine that no one knows as much as you. And how do you convey something to someone who doesn't know the subject? That's the challenge we all face. And the more complicated the items, or the more difficult the description, the greater the challenge and the greater the reward in being able to present this material. Here we can see how the overprints with an inverted O, an inverted N, and an inverted S, you can see how the pieces were actually done incorrectly, and down here you can actually see the difference. And then once you know what you're looking at, you can then see it over here. This is a marvelous page. I think this page was in my book, actually. It's a really well done example of communicating to the viewer information that couldn't otherwise be seen. In Gwalior, the big R, again, this isn't done well. It should be reproduced as the plain overprint by itself and in comparison to a regular R. There is a bit of knowledge here. It says where it's shown. The judges will like the fact that it can be placed, and having the corner pieces makes it even more attractive because it shows that the placement is correct. But this is an example of how not to do it well. Now, in Palestine, early Palestine, they had these overprints, and these have missing stops, missing periods. Now, you can't tell, I can't tell, no one could know. But what this person did, he showed in a different ink where to look, where the periods are missing, so that if one was inclined to look, they could see, okay, the second E here has no period after it. You look down here and say, oh my goodness, there's no period there. There's no period after the first one here. There's no period there. So without this set of visual cues, this would be uninterpretable. The use of color makes it easy to see. This is a great example, I thought. In Somaliland, there were two types of overprints of the Victorian stamps. In one, the B is over the M, and one, the B is over the space between the O and the M. And on the page, I tried to make a little example of each. This is a blow-up of what I did. It's not perfect. I couldn't get the B exactly over the M, but there's a big difference between the B being here and the B being over here, where it's above the space between the O and the M. And I don't know how big a screen you have there, but on the printed page, these examples are pretty different. Again, if you only set it, in words, like over here, if you only set it in words, people would have an extraordinarily difficult time converting those words to an image and then looking at the image. And varieties. Somebody might look at these and say, gee, they look the same. I mean, why are the three on a page? But if you describe exactly what a person is looking at, on this stamp there's an A on the left, on this stamp there's an LA on the left, and this stamp there's an IALA on the left, it makes it clear what someone is looking at. And, oops, I'm having a hard time with this, aren't I? Oh, this is just an enlargement of that. So it's more clear what was done here. So that a viewer knows what's being shown rather than just having their eye pass quickly across and not knowing what's being shown or what they're looking at. This is Karpatha, Ukraine. You can't see the overprints. So you pull them out. And in this case, there's a difference between the 28-degree angle of the overprint and a 38-degree angle of the overprint. That's fairly evident by itself. When the angles of overprints are closer and it's harder to discern, you can overlay I keep doing this, I apologize. You can overlay a 90-degree angle with the diagonal on it, and you can have them either overlaid or next to each other. In this case, they're sufficiently different you can see them. You really can't see them on the stamps, but this lets a viewer and a judge know what's there, and you show that you know what you're talking about. There was a variety that appeared on the Champa stamps where there was a raised E. You can say raised E, no one knows what to look for. If you show it, it's then easy to see it. And not only do you show it, but you say where it is. It's a stamp on the right. And then, if someone wants to, they care, they can look and they can see it very easily. Now here's an example of something that wasn't done well. This is the 9mm spacing. There was one stamp in each sheet that had a 9mm instead of, the more normal 10 or 12. So here it is. But nobody can appreciate that. Does anyone have a thought of what might have been a better way to show this? I think that if I had taken, it's 8mm and 10mm. If I had put an 8mm right next to it on this side, damn, I can't keep doing that. The 8mm on this side and the 10mm on this side, there would be a very obvious difference between the 8, 9, and the 10. And if it wasn't obvious enough by itself, then I would have enlarged them. And so that you could maybe even draw on a little, very thin gray horizontal line, showing that they were not the same. Was there a comment there?
No.
It's very difficult to show flaws in other people's material. You don't want to point a finger at anyone. No one likes having their weaknesses pointed out. I make lots and lots and lots of mistakes. I've been doing a lot of exhibits for many years. I've made most of the mistakes you can make. So I have all kinds of images of things that I've done poorly that I can use. This page is from one of Sandeep's exhibits, where there's two types of the surcharge on the card. One is very rare, and one is the more common regular one. If you would describe them as normal and thin, no one would know what that meant. But again, with an illustration, you can clearly see the difference. And then once you know what it looks like, you can move your eyes over here and say, yes, this is the thin one. another, I'm very impressed by Sandeep's exhibiting skills. From one of his exhibits in Jaipur, he's got 4 different stones that he talks about. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I don't know Jaipur well. I don't know these stamps. If I saw these laying out somewhere, and he said, you know, there's 4 stones and here they are, except for the fact this one looks a little light, this one's a little dark, I would have no way of understanding anything about them except for the patterns of lightness and darkness. But there's 4 rows here of differences that distinguish attributes for each of these. It shows the knowledge. More importantly, it lets the viewer and the judge see exactly what it is that we're looking at. Otherwise, we couldn't tell. And then, you know, these are artificial distinctions. It's all the same thing. How do you let people appreciate what you're showing? How can you educate the viewer? How can the viewer come away knowing more than they did when they started? So, 2 envelopes. Words above that describe and words below that describe, and the words are different. Minor differences. I'm using a little screen at the moment. I can't see very clearly. I hope you can see. I think this is a smaller print and this is bigger print. My image is so small I can't read it on my screen. I hope you have a bigger screen. But so this describes, shows, and explains. Now, the fronts of these envelopes look exactly the same, but there's actually big differences between them. So it's not a very attractive layout of how to show it, but it is possible to kind of like what Sandeep did with his Jaipur stamps. You can show what the differences are, and that way a viewer can actually see that there are indeed differences between these. It makes it more exciting, both for us to present it that way, because we know what we have, we learn about these things, and it makes it more exciting for a viewer. There's things that look alike aren't alike, and that's always, you know, the joy of knowledge or exploration is almost always fun. The 3 proofs on a page, listed as die proofs. What are they? Well, what this is, it's progressive proofs. When I first prepared this page back in, I don't know, 2010 maybe, I didn't even know the term progressive proofs. So I didn't know it, I didn't say it. The judges could tell that I didn't know it or that I didn't say it. I didn't get the benefit of the points for knowledge for showing what I was showing. But to do this properly, this would be labeled progressive proofs. And if I were adept with graphics, I might even scan the left-hand side of all 3 of these images to show how they progressed from one to the other with a solid, it's called an uncleared surround. The the thing around the indicia has not been cut away. And then here, it's been largely cut away. And we learned from this also that they did, before hardening and after hardening of the progressive dies, not just the final dies. And then here's an example of the final die. So if these had been laid out side by side, it would be, I believe, a much more compelling presentation, and it would make it much easier for a viewer to see what's going on. If I use the term uncleared surround and use the words the space surrounding the head, well, somebody might think it's the space literally surrounding the head, and that doesn't change. So this is one of the examples of something which might look like it's okay, but it's not. It's not well presented. I'm not showing the information which is there to see if only it were pointed out or presented in a more easily understood manner. This is another example. When I got this a long time ago, when these things were cheap, I didn't know what this was. Yes, so I lost points for knowledge, and I lost the opportunity, like on the other one, to compare the edges here with an image of a die proof that was in the final state. Now, I don't have one of those, I don't think, but I could have done it with an image to illustrate what this was and how it varied from the final form of the die. A missed opportunity. This is a big revenue thing. It's got the document has a value of wait a minute, I'm trying to read this. Yeah, the document has a value, represents a transaction of 281,000 rupees, and the revenue stamps on this are 4,215 rupees. And these are, the 500 rupee stamps. It's an attractive piece, looks nice. But what does it mean? I mean, how does someone interpret this? How does someone understand this? So the words on the side here, I did this in 2014. So what I said, so that someone could appreciate this, so the face value of the stamps, which I then went to a conversion table for 1927 conversion from rupees to dollars, and then I went to an inflation adjuster that went from $1927 to $2014, and this is almost $21,000 face value in the stamps, which I believe it conveys a more meaningful way to understand this, particularly for an American audience, than saying, well, it had 4,000 rupees worth of stamps on it. Of course, I haven't quite figured out what to do when you show it different years, and I haven't figured out an easier way to update the value to the current inflation adjusted dollars if I show it subsequently. And if I was showing this someplace else, if I was showing it in India, for instance, I might be tempted to do the inflation adjustment just for rupees and not bother with dollars. And if I was showing it someplace else, I might do it in the currency of the country in which I was showing it. again, a missed opportunity. This is not the proof of this. This is a much earlier version. And this is, I believe this to be an inadequate presentation of the material on the page because it doesn't say what it is. It doesn't explain it. A viewer who is not familiar with the engraving process has no idea what they're looking at and how, if at all, this large black object with a little picture in the middle relates to this little picture. This is a very poor example of trying to communicate something. Now, I'm going to show you something that I haven't figured out yet. I don't know what to do. This is a stock transfer form. On this stock transfer form, I collect the Edwardian period. And this is a very rare, very uncommon stamp where the Victorian share transfer stamp was surcharged. So there's a little surcharge here, but it's very hard to see it on the page. So at some point, and this fills, this is roughly legal size, 8.5 by 14. So I put it on a piece of paper, 11.5 by 14, and it fills the whole page. I don't want to fold things, even though it's sturdy paper. I try to avoid folding things. I may have to, put in a portion of a page with a highlighted illustration of this, similar to this, and a representation of the surcharge next to it. That might be best, but I haven't really figured out how to do it. This is a very scarce stamp, and it's very hard to see. There's a little piece of the surcharge up here, and a little piece of the surcharge down here. And on this page by itself, it fades into nothingness. So the challenge to me is to figure out a way to draw the eye to what I want the viewer to see. And that is the surcharge below and the surcharge above. The one right next to it is an obvious comparison. Anyway, this is something. So, this stuff is fun for me. There are resources. American Philatelic Society on their website has a lot of information about exhibiting. There's a better website for exhibiting information from the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors. On the APS website, this is some of the materials that they have. Articles, the judging manual used for the US, PowerPoint slides for seminars that judges in this country are required to take. One of the things that's on the website is, and this appears in several different places on different websites, but there's a listing of the possible philatelic elements that can be used in a thematic exhibit. This is just the first page. There is a second page. There's a lot of stuff. This is from the AAPE website. And these are some of the resources that are there. They also have a large number of exhibits. In this country, there's a form the judges fill out when they review an exhibit, and these are some of the things that they look for. I'd be happy to take any questions. I can tell you in advance that the answer to almost any question I'm asked about exhibiting is, it depends. But you can always work through. You can always work through the various factors. Something I want to be sure to mention is the books that I've been involved with at Amazon, and they can be searched 100% perfectly with Exhibitors Press as one word and my name, and with 95% accuracy with Exhibitors Press as a single word. And I've had the good fortune to be able to do two of Sandeep's exhibits as books. And beyond that, it's always difficult when I'm trying to do two things at once. It never works out well. And beyond that, there's also books on treatment and presentation for display, thematic, and topical exhibits. And there is a book on preparing synopses. In this country, we send a synopsis to the judge, to the judges before the show, and judges have an opportunity to prepare for the exhibits. And then, oh God, just to show you real quickly, did I just change the screen?
You did.
Okay, this is Amazon. And this is just some of the exhibits and books that I've been involved in. I know that within the members of the India Study Circle, there are several exhibits that would make wonderful books. I just haven't been able to track you down yet and know what the exhibits are and who the exhibitors are. But I've been fortunate that I've been able to come across, I mean, for instance, this book here. This book is what was a champion of champion winners. The grand award winners from all the different national shows in the country had a competition. So this was for 1 year, this was the champion of champions for the multi-frames. And as an appendix to this book, it was the champion of champions for the single frame, for a single stamp in the set. But no, I've been doing this for about 6 years now. So there's a good number of these things. But so that's my email if anybody wants to talk to me, and I'd be delighted to have some conversation now if we have time and if anyone's interested.
Steve, thank you very much. I think this was very educational. I certainly made a lot of notes in my mind, things that I'm going to adopt that you mentioned. At this point, we'll take questions if anybody's got any questions for Steve.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, Piyush has a question. Piyush, do you want to come over here?
Sure. Yeah, Steve, hi, this is PK. I have a question for you, which is about covers.
Okay.
You know, I have covers dealing with, airmails and postal history on rates and postage dues. There's relevant information on both sides of the cover, the front and the back. It's important to bring out the aspect I want to highlight. So, do I slit the cover and show both sides, or do I just show the more important side and put a reduced copy of the other?
I think it's the latter. I don't think you want to cut open any covers. I think you want to show the side that's most important, and if you can, show a color reproduction at a different size next to the actual cover. Sometimes people make color copies at 100% size, and that confuses everyone because people can't tell if it's one cover or two covers being shown. You
Great,
also
thank-
have the option.
Steve, I'll
Go
get
ahead.
you to continue on this very subject matter. I had dinner with Behruz last night, and we were talking about this exact same thing about showing uh, one side and showing a reduced image. So what Behruz said he's just started doing is he actually has a QR code right underneath the cover with the other side and full, so you can actually just go into the QR code and then you can see the image of the other side of the cover and additional information, including additional description. So I don't know
Right.
if judges are good with that, but that's what he said he was telling me he started doing now.
Right. My experience has been in the shows where I've seen that and the shows where I've actually tried to do that, that the judges don't take the time to do that because they're scanning pages instead of going in depth. And secondly, there's not always good, at least when I was doing this, there was not always good Wi-Fi reception in the middle of the exhibit hall.
That's true. You're right.
So that can be done for the exhibitors who want to study your exhibit. But if there's any item in particular that you want to highlight on the back, you can do a Xerox of the particular postmark or receiving mark or auxiliary mark that you want to show. You don't necessarily need to show the entire back of the cover.
Right. Right.
But if you want to show the entire back, you should do it in color and at a size, maybe 75%, maybe 50%,
Right.
depending on the size and the resolution of the material you want to show.
Yeah. And I
Now,
always
I
make
was-
a point to.
I
to
saw
act-
in-
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was at a show recently, and the guy showed the backs of every single thing in the color Xerox. I said, "Why did you do this?" He said, "Someone told me I had to show the backs." It was pretty silly.
Yeah, what I do is when I show a scanned image, I always make an annotation underneath that scanned image of reverse display shown at 75% or 70%, just so that there's
Right.
no confusion.
There actually is a member of the ISC who, in one of the exhibits, showed the backs the same size as the fronts, and there was a little bit of confusion in trying to figure out if they were one cover or two covers.
Right, right,
So don't show it the same size.
right. So that's the key. Thank you. Any other questions? I guess that's it, Steve. Well, thanks again. And I think with that,
Well,
we're
thanks
gonna-
for inviting me.
I'm sorry? Oh no, absolutely. So with that, this presentation comes to a conclusion.